Welcome to RHI's Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today we are honored to be with Michael Fichman, lecturer and interim program director in the Master of Urban Spatial Analytics program at the University of Pennsylvania's Fichman School of Design.
Hey, Michael, this is a great opportunity to talk to you today. We'll get into it, but you must be awfully excited that the office has been created and a person has been hired. And the announcement just came out today when we're doing this interview.
That's right. Philadelphia's Office of Nighttime Economy, the Nighttime Economy Director, is a real thing. And it's been a long slog of years and years of ideation and meetings and activism and number crunching and pandemics and all the things we've gone through. It's cool to pull back the curtain for everybody so that we can really get to work.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. And you're the second city in Pennsylvania. So you're kind of one of the growing states that have multiple cities. Orlando, Florida is one of those, and Georgia now they're going to add Savannah, so they have several cities that have an office and a night manager. But I want to get a little bit more into your background. So, in everybody's life, there's always these stopping points, and then they move on and they take that collective knowledge to create whatever it is that they're going to be doing at that point. So briefly discuss, your background, your education experience and insights, and the stops that you've made along the way to get to where you are today.
Certainly. So I was born in Pittsburgh, east end of Pittsburgh, nearby Jerry's Records, one of the world's great record stores. I'm a bi-coastal Pennsylvanian, right? So I started out in Pittsburgh, came to Philadelphia to go to school. And I went into the music business, not very deliberately, but it just kind of happened. And I was DJing in nightclubs and I was producing music and putting on shows. And then before I knew it, people were asking me to travel around to other cities around the world. And it was great. I did that for a living for, close to 10 years. And so maybe the story is best encapsulated by this vignette. I'm playing a gig in Louisville, Kentucky. 2009, 10, something like that. And I'm in a warehouse. And I said to the promoter, I said, when the police show up, am I still going to get paid? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, this is clearly kind of like a renegade event here. When this place gets raided, am I going to get paid? And he said, no, this is all very legal. We have a liquor license, we have a safety plan, insurance, all these things on file with the city, and for one day. And I said, how's that possible? And he explained the backstory that related to the Kentucky Derby and speakeasies and ways that these kinds of things were legalized through various channels. And I thought, whoa, why don't we have that in Philadelphia? Or, you're riding on the train in Berlin and it's free. Well, not free, just free passage, there's no turnstile and it's very fluid. Well, why is that? This is so easy. Why can't we do this here? And so over time, as I ended up kind of phasing out of the music industry as a full-time job, largely to diminish the amount of travel and start a family and stuff, this idea of like cities and nightlife was always on my mind. And so I got a degree in city planning from University of Pennsylvania, and then I've come to work there at a consulting center, and I teach there. I'm a lecturer in the city planning department, and I brought these two things into, that unique Venn diagram that I think all of us in this field have, where we bring together the community that we're from and the specific skills and insights that we have, and we try to merge the two. So that's my backstory, and it very much informs a lot of the work I've been doing the last number of years.
And I've noticed in reviewing some of your work, unlike some other people who are getting involved in this field, you take a very data-driven approach. Looking at what does the data suggest? What are the trends? How can you identify points of intervention based upon more statistical information? So how did you begin to start thinking that this isn't just a philosophical concept. It's not just a, hey, wouldn't it be a great idea to have a night matter, mayor, night, or an office and a director and whatever it's going to be called. How did you, get outside of that? Oh, this would be a cool thing to do, to say, oh no, we have to use some data before we make decisions.
Right. That comes from my training as a city planner. I'm very much quantitative in my approach. I was the director of the Urban Spatial Analytics Master's Program at Penn for a while. And that approach is very much geared towards the idea of data-informed decision-making, intelligence that comes from analysis of available data that's transformed into action or policy. So keep thinking about that on the technical side. I met with two people who have become close colleagues of mine years ago, Mirek Milan and Lutz Leichsenring from Vibe Lab, and we were just talking about policy issues and community organizing I was doing with my group 24-Hour Philadelphia in Philly. And they told me about this data collection project they had been starting called the Creative Footprint. And then immediately it just kind of clicked that there was an opportunity to develop all sorts of different insights and from asking questions or analyzing data based on what we understand based on our domain expertise to be important or relevant, and then translating that into the kinds of facts, figures, one-page memos, maps, graphs, tables, whatever, that policymakers are accustomed to engaging with. And so it becomes the translation machine that gets you from the dance floor to the boardroom.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Now, one of the papers that you shared, I don't know how you were involved with it, but I thought it was quite interesting because we just did a series of forums on gun violence. And we had over 80 people over 2 sessions participate, and they came from, I think, about 26 different cities. So clearly it's an issue, gun violence in nightlife that everybody was really concerned about, and everybody was looking for solutions. And clearly there were some kind of strategic recommendations. But the paper that you wrote or that you shared really pointed out that violence in nightlife districts may be not as, obviously when, like in Philadelphia, you get 3 people who are shot, and some of them innocent bystanders, that's tragic. But, talking with somebody that I know from the major cities chiefs, he said, well, on that same night, there was like 8 other people who were shot in the city of Philadelphia. So it's only that it gets the headlines. So what was the results of that paper that you shared?
Right. So I'm a member of Philadelphia City Council's Arts and Culture Task Force, where our job is to advise City Council on matters related to arts and culture, economies, communities, and so on. That is the quasi-governmental organ from which the Nighttime Economy Director's Office proposal came. So gun violence, Philadelphia is experiencing epidemic levels of gun violence. And even prior to this kind of disjoint that saw rising gun violence across the country, Philadelphia has traditionally been one of the more violent of the top 10 major cities in the country. So there was a shooting, as you mentioned, on South Street, which is one of our historic nightlife corridors. And we, as the Arts and Culture Task Force, realized, well, had known for some time, but realized that this was a flashpoint that we needed to get our voice out there, because there was basically policy experimentation going on in an emergency management way, like ad hoc crisis management. The Raheem Manning, the Nighttime Economy Director, is not yet in place. And we knew we needed to put out some ideas that we thought were not as prohibition oriented towards nightlife businesses and patronage. But we wanted to base it in research. So we did a sprawling analysis of firearm incidents in Philadelphia for the last 5 years by time of day and location. What we found was that there's a relatively consistent proportion of firearm incidents that take place in commercial corridors that make up between 10 and 15 at night, I should say, after 6 p.m. before 6 a.m., that make up consistently about 10 to 15% of incidents. That percentage has not changed as the overall amount of gun violence has risen. So, and on average, you are safer at night if you are in the close to a licensed establishment. Whether that has something to do with just the nature of crime, that a lot of it is domestic or focused in neighborhoods where there's a lot of drug trade or so on, we found that destination corridors in Philadelphia had relatively low levels of gun violence. What relative to what we thought they should have, South Street has 300+% of the traffic of an average commercial corridor in Philadelphia, but certainly not 300% the amount of gun incidents. In fact, less than average. So that said, the second part of when we wrote an op-ed in the Philadelphia Inquirer was that, that doesn't really do anything to assuage public fear.
Yeah.
However, that gives some evidence that people can use to make policy decisions that grounds the relative amount of danger, in fact. So you can make a policy that reflects the fact, not the fear, which has to be dealt with in a separate way, I suppose.
The majority of automobile fatalities that involve alcohol occur by people who are drinking, in nightlife districts and venues after midnight. And, when you trace back to where people were coming from, it's often licensed establishments and generally young men under 25. So you could have a much more targeted intervention if you get that kind of data and say, okay, where were these people coming from? And let's work with those businesses instead of saying, oh, we have to close businesses down earlier because people are dying in drunk driving or in driving accidents. So anyhow, that's quite interesting. And in my talking with people in law enforcement, a lot of the shootings are really more revenge shootings. One person in a neighborhood shoots somebody else and then somebody else gets revenge for that. And so it's an escalating situation, which really makes it very difficult for intervention. But in nightlife districts, that's really what people are challenged with. Even though it's rarer than other situations, it still gets the most news. And even on our calls, Mike Harris from South Street said, the following week after the shooting, he mentioned something like 40% decline in businesses or people on the street, and including during the daytime, so one shooting in a nightlife district can have serious economic impacts for the businesses that are there. So recently you were involved in the global recovery plan process. You mentioned Merrick and Lutz, and during COVID, that was quite an ambitious global initiative with a number of papers that were written that were part of that. Now, of all of the work that you've done and all of the reviews of those documents, how would you synthesize all of those reports into the three most top level recommendations?
For sure. That series of documents produced a ton of different policy recommendations, dozens and dozens. I think the main takeaways are less for me policies than some process oriented things that I took away from it. One is that the value of knowledge sharing in our field, and RHI has been critical to that over the years. We really came together as a group to learn from each other and share with each other in a moment of great need. The second thing is that I think the very official nature of it, the affiliation of the project with University of Pennsylvania, and the number of people involved gave a lot of official legitimacy to our work, which is something that over the years we've been gaining more and more of, and helping to burst through some people's stigmatization of the field that we're involved in. And then the last thing I'd say is that it really spoke to the need to be prepared. Opportunity was there for all of us to say our piece in front of governments because we were going through a crisis, and we were ready. And this was a lot about just coalescing all the ideas that we could to, use that knowledge sharing to be prepared across the board in every city, in every community as best we could.
And that relates to my final question and point of discussion. But to summarize, what I heard you say is that the process is almost more important than the product. We always talk to people about they want to have our report, and we always say, well, the report's important, but it's the process of getting the report that's important. And what you're saying also is that it's the legitimacy of those who pull the information together. And then finally, that helps when advocating before government. So would that be kind of the way that you see what you learned from that? And with that, you must be excited today because I just got a notice that the new director has been named. And I know you've been instrumental in putting that program together. And I suspect these three principles that you identified really have formed some of the foundation of what you did to help create that office. So how do you feel, and what were the struggles that you went through? What were the challenges in getting people to be convinced, and what would you recommend to other cities that might be facing similar challenges?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the process in Philadelphia was in some ways the global nighttime recovery plan in miniature. But we had a big menu of things that we could offer. So the Arts and Culture Task Force was brought together to try to respond to the needs of Philadelphia's artists. Myself and some members of my community group said, hey, nighttime and nightlife is the time and place where a lot of this is going on. So, and then we should focus on that. And here's the menu. As far as challenges to overcome, there was definitely an educational process that needed to go on with policymakers, because as I'm sure you and many folks who are listening to this know, sometimes you meet somebody who I suppose would be uninitiated to this time-based way of thinking or about the city, or thinking about the city through the lens of these specific industries and activities. So that was certainly a part of it. I would say that the hard work is now really beginning, because when we gave that menu, it consisted of a lot of different policies and governance strategies. And we looked at the nighttime economy director as being an essential component to make sure that the policies are seen through and are cared for and are, that there's deliberate governance. But some of the other stuff is far more challenging. Reforming licensing and zoning. We were speaking about gun violence, thinking about what harm reduction and public safety look like in the future coming up. And then there are always economic development challenges, whether it's to corridors or downtown at large or in neighborhoods. So a lot of this is the rubber's going to meet the road, and hopefully communities and workers and everybody get very involved and embrace this.
Well, I think the new director, and I look forward to meeting the person, has a really good start. Like I mentioned before, it's like a conductor with an orchestra. You need the conductor. The conductor needs to have the music score, and then you have to have all of the different sections of the orchestra playing in harmony. So now this person is basically going to be leading the orchestra, but what you've done is help to give that music score to that person to begin with in a more positive, and a much more foundational way than we've seen in other cities that just basically create the job and said, figure it out yourself.
I was offered the job very early on, and I said I was not interested. And part of that has to do with the fact that I want to be here to build the universe in which this person can effectively operate.
Mhm.
I want to be here to tell them when they're screwing up. I want to be here to tell them, I'm here to help when they need my help. And that those partnerships and that, having strong stakeholders who are invested is just as key as having an office. The office itself is nothing without, the people who are either inside or outside of that place, and the governance around it, and the investment from the politicians.
Any building needs a foundation, and so what you've done is built the foundation, and now it's just a matter of adding the stories. So, well, this has been great, Michael. I really am impressed with all the work that you do, and it was a delight to talk to you, especially on such a historic occasion for the city of Philadelphia.
Thanks so much, Jim. And I have to tip my hat to you in thanks as well. I've, as an observer of your work and somebody who's learned a lot from you and from RHI speakers and things over the years, some credit goes to you and to all those that you've brought into my world as well.
Okay, well, thanks. And we look forward to working again with you.
Cheers.